Why Russia keeps producing the toughest fighters on earth. In a sport where a champion emerges maybe once a decade from any given country, one region keeps producing them again, and again, and again. Not one champion. A dynasty. Khabib. Islam Makhachev. Zabit. Umar Nurmagomedov. All from the same mountains. This isn't talent. Talent is random. This is a machine, built by geography, culture, and decades of quiet infrastructure most of the world never saw. So why does one strip of mountains in southern Russia keep beating the rest of the planet at the most physically demanding sport in existence? The answer starts with something most fight fans never think about: altitude. Dagestan sits in the North Caucasus, a region where villages are carved into mountainsides thousands of feet above sea level. At that altitude, the air holds less oxygen. Every breath delivers less than it would at sea level.
Здесь 1750 метров сосновый лес. Вы сами видите, как здесь тяжело дышать. Как только спускаемся, нам становится легче. Задача ведь такая: тяжело в учении, легко в бою.
The body adapts by producing more red blood cells, cells that carry oxygen to muscles. Train here long enough, and your blood becomes a performance enhancer nature gave you for free. This is called altitude training, and elite endurance athletes fly across the world to do it for a few weeks a year. In Dagestan, it's just home. The result shows up in the third round, the fourth round, the fifth round, when other fighters' gas tanks empty, and Russian fighters are still pushing forward. Khabib Nurmagomedov's cardio became legendary, 25 minutes of relentless pressure with no visible drop-off. Doctors and coaches called it almost unfair. But altitude alone doesn't explain it. Plenty of high-altitude regions exist. None of them produce fighters like this. Something else is happening here. In most countries, kids choose a sport. In Dagestan, wrestling chooses them. Sambo and freestyle wrestling aren't extracurriculars, they're the default childhood activity, as normal as riding a bike. By the time a Dagestani fighter steps into a UFC cage, they've already logged more competitive wrestling hours than most opponents will in a lifetime.
Вот и закончилась тренировка. Справа от нас сидит старый партнер Ислам Makhachev, который готовится на мир, а боевому самбо. Также у нас...
There's a regional saying, more myth than fact by now, that in some villages, more Olympic wrestling champions have come from one town than entire countries have produced. Whether or not the exact numbers hold up, the pattern is real, an entire regional identity built around grappling dominance. Losing isn't just a loss. In a culture like this, it's personal, generational, tied to family name. That pressure creates fighters who don't just want to win, they're terrified of the alternative. This is the psychological layer the altitude science can't explain on its own. None of this happened by accident. It was built, starting with the Soviet Union.
Но по сути начинается она уже на ежедневной утренней тренировке. Большинство этих упражнений борцы будут выполнять и на основных занятиях. Утром же они полезны для поддержания мышечного тонуса, подготовки мышц и связок к интенсивным нагрузкам. Даже в таких упражнениях, составляющих часть технико-тактической подготовки, закладывается база для скоростно-силовой работы на специальных тренировках. Большое значение выполнять
When the Soviet Union collapsed, the state funding largely disappeared. But the coaching lineage, the culture, and the local infrastructure stayed. One man became the bridge between that old system and the modern MMA era, Umar Nurmagomedov. A former Soviet Sambo champion himself, he built a training camp in Dagestan combining wrestling fundamentals with emerging MMA striking and submission systems.
Я тоже проходи ногу. Значит, вот рука. Еще раз. Вот раз. Просто, они что видели. Проходи, покажи, что раз, выйди, вот рука. Вот передняя нога, надо встречать передней рукой. Но если вы начали, возвращайся.
That camp didn't just train his son. It became a pipeline, producing multiple UFC-level fighters from the same room.
Вот отсюда тяжело защищаться мне. Но если ты проходишь вот смотри, вот в эту сторону, вот тогда вот задняя нога, просто мы поворачиваемся на 45 градусов, прихватываем близко, и вот здесь хорошо защищаем. Но если вы проходите в одну ногу, и отсюда переходить до этого. Вот, это правильный проход. Теперь он взял одну ногу, отсюда перешел на вторую и голову поднимать, и атакуешь. Вот здесь тяжело защищаться. Это называется на...
This is the part most fans miss. It's not one genetic outlier. It's a repeatable system. Local Sambo and wrestling federations still feed talent upward, identifying kids early and fast-tracking them through competitive circuits. By the time a fighter reaches the UFC, they've already survived a filtering system most countries don't have. The results speak for themselves. Khabib Nurmagomedov, 29-0. Never lost a round in his last several fights. Islam Makhachev inherited that same style, relentless wrestling pressure, suffocating control, and a gas tank that doesn't fade. Zabit Makhachev brought flash to the formula, but underneath the flying attacks was the same base, wrestling first. Even fighters from the wider Caucasus region, Chechnya, North Ossetia, carry the same DNA of relentless forward pressure. Compare that to fighters from flatland countries with no altitude exposure and no generational wrestling culture, the physical gap becomes obvious by the championship rounds. This isn't about nationality being superior. It's a case study in what happens when geography, culture, and systems align for one purpose. And the UFC has noticed. For years, it marketed this dominance. Khabib became one of the biggest draws in company history.
I'm gonna smash your boy. And I wanna say thank you, all Irish fans, you know, all fans around the world. Because of you guys, this fight is happening. Thank you guys, and tomorrow night, inshallah, and still.
But dominance without competition is a business problem. If one region wins too consistently, storylines dry up, and so does drama. Some analysts believe matchmaking and marketing have quietly started shifting away from an all-Caucasus dominance narrative, not banning it, just diversifying around it. Whether that's a deliberate strategy or a natural business reaction, one thing is clear: the mountains built something the sports business side now has to manage. So can this be replicated? Could another country build the same machine, the altitude, the culture, the pipeline? Geography can be copied. Systems can be built. But decades of culture, pride, and inherited pressure? That's much harder to manufacture. Maybe that's the real answer. Not one factor, but all of them, compounding for generations, in one specific place on Earth. The mountains didn't just shape the land. They shaped the fighters who'd one day leave them.